Hello and welcome to another video in the series of Top Grades Made Easy. So we're looking at Sybil Birling. Let's get straight in and show you how easy it is to move into grades 7, 8 and 9. We start with the conventional view, the one that's going to get you at least to grade 6. So Sybil Birling symbolises the uncaring nature of capitalism. The quotation we can use is, "But I accept no blame for it at all." So she refuses to learn the inspector's lesson, and Priestley uses her to symbolise how capitalist women in particular, the rich, do not sympathise with people who are poorer than them and socially inferior. And that, of course, is what he wants to change through his play. She also symbolises one of the 7 deadly sins, the one of pride, and this comes from the idea of the morality play. And if you don't know about morality plays, they were Christian plays designed to teach the lessons of the Bible during the Middle Ages, when most of the population couldn't read the Bible because it was written in Latin, and anyway they probably couldn't read anyway. So the idea was that you would teach moral behaviour through the morality play. And this is what Priestley's play is doing. It's trying to teach moral behaviour by showing the immoral actions of the rich. Now, she also symbolises class prejudice. So you'll remember from the opening stage directions that she is a social superior to her husband. So she's come from, if you like, a more socially upper class family than Arthur Birling, who's probably got there through business, but whereas she's been born into it. And that's one of the reasons why Priestley presents her as such a horrible figure, because he's attacking the upper classes who have been around for centuries rather than those who have just reached it through wealth, through business. And we can see that using the quotation where she says girls of that class, dismissing Eva and her request at Sybil Birling's charity for help when she's pregnant. And this, of course, is the last straw, if you like, before Eva decides that life's not worth living. And by placing Sybil Birling last in the list of characters who's had something to do with Eva, Priestley could be suggesting that she is the one who's most responsible, because she could, at the end, have saved Eva from her sense of despair by giving her financial help. Okay, so you've got a contextual reference there, you've got 2 quotations, you can easily get into the grade 7 just on that. So it's not hard. Right, let's go a little further and see what else Priestley has in store for us. So here is a representation of a Sybil. So where did she get her name? Why did Priestley call her Sybil? Well, as adults in 1945 who go to plays, or who went to plays, would have been educated in the classics, the Greek myths and the Roman myths, the Roman writers and the Greek writers, while they were at school and at university. So Sybil is named after the Greek myth of the Sybil's, and they were famous for their gift of prophecy. Prophecy means the ability to see into the future. Now, Priestley uses this ironically, because Sybil Birling is actually blind. She refuses to see, as I'll show you in a minute. So she deliberately refuses to see, deliberately makes herself blind, and therefore she is named ironically. A brilliant bit of context for you to use there, because Priestley wants to point out that she could behave so differently. You know, if she behaved like her namesake, she would see society in a different way. And her role in society would therefore be to help others rather than damage them. So we can use some evidence to prove that. She knows nothing of Eric's alcohol addiction. She's totally unaware of Alderman McGarty's sexual attacks on young women, even though Sheila knows full well about them, doesn't she? And she has no idea that Eric is in a relationship with Eva, or that he has got her pregnant. And these are all examples in which Priestley shows that she is either blind or, I think, willfully blind. She's deliberately tried not to find anything out which alters her prejudiced worldview. So let's see which quotation I would use for that. when she's finally confronted with the truth of Eric's relationship with Eva, she actually refuses to believe it. She says, I don't believe it. I won't believe it. And that's where we get that willful blindness from, that deliberate prejudice that she will hang on to despite any facts that are presented to her that prove her wrong. And she also exhibits this blindness by expecting Sheila to turn a blind eye to Gerald's infidelity when she said, you know, you'll have to get used to men of business being away, just as I had. So Priestley's making a profound point here that women in this patriarchal society are made to accept the injustice of the behaviour of the men that they're married to. And the point that he's making is that Sybil isn't just prejudiced, she's also a victim of that society. It's the patriarchal society that's asked her to accept infidelity as normal that actually has taught her to turn a blind eye. So her social blindness and her deliberate choice not to believe and refusing to believe is actually produced by a sexist patriarchal society that has forced her to put aside the truth so that she can live a happy life. If she actually faced the truth of how men behave towards her in her own marriage, then she couldn't be happy. So, you know, Priestley is actually attacking what society has done to Sybil Birling. Okay, is she the most to blame? Well, because Sybil is the last person who could have helped Eva, she is often the character most blamed. But here's a grade 8 and 9 idea for you. I think that this is the opposite of what Priestley intended. So what do I mean by that? Well, what actually tips Eva over the edge, what puts her in that state of despair in the first place, is the two characters who've sexually exploited her. First, Gerald, who's made her fall in love with him and then rejected her, and then Eric, where love has not been an issue, he's simply abused her, got her pregnant, and then really made her feel like a criminal because she's having to rely on stolen money. So she feels utterly degraded by Gerald and Eric, and they are what has driven her to this final decision of deciding to end her life. Because, after all, Eric's still got money. So when Sybil refuses to help in the charity, remember, Eva could go to Eric and say, well, okay, I'm not getting anything from the charity, I'll take your money. But that is a symbol of how she's been exploited, so she won't do it. Therefore, I think Eric is far more to blame than Sybil Birling. Now, there's some other context from 1945 which is going to be really useful here. So, during the election of 1945, the Labour Party proposed the welfare state. Now, the welfare state is what we still have now, and it's the idea that when you're unemployed or you're homeless, the state will step in and help you financially and also help to house you. And it basically, the state, the government, is there to look after your welfare. It's there to look after every citizen. Now, this is not the position in 1912. So somebody like Eva can't simply go to the government for help. It's just not there. And so instead they go to charities. Well, where do charities get their money from at this time? Well, from the rich, and therefore the rich decide who gets the welfare. And obviously if the rich are prejudiced, then that's not going to be given out fairly. Now, this is an interesting idea when it comes to the blame that Priestley might attach with Sybil. So Sybil is kept till last because she represents the last resort, the safety net that society should provide the poor. So she actually represents what the welfare state could be, which I've told you began in 1945. In 1912 and between the wars, the welfare was often left to charities, and this is what Priestley wants to change. So he's actually saying, look, even if Sybil Birling was a nice human being who did look after people, it wouldn't be enough, because leaving things just to a charity would not guarantee the welfare of everybody. And then he does something which I think is quite extraordinary. He actually presents Sybil Birling's actions in a way that's totally opposite to what we expect. So the easiest way I can show that to you is ask you this question. Well, if you were Sybil Birling, why should you believe Eva? Like, why? Let's have a look at how Eva behaves at the charity. So, Priestley doesn't show that Mrs. Birling is corrupt like her husband. You know, she's not trying to make more money or keep the money for herself. She is dismissive and prejudiced of Eva as girls of that class, but actually most women in charge of the charity would actually have been suspicious of Eva. Why? Well, Eva begins by lying about her name. She gives a false identity. She says that she's called Birling. And firstly, that is fraud in order to gain money. So she lies in order to gain money, and this is an obvious lie. So why should Sybil Birling and her charity give money to Eva when she's begun by trying to commit fraud to get that money? Secondly, she lies about the father of the child, claiming that he had abandoned her after marrying her. This is what Sybil says. I'd refuse to believe her original story, that she was a married woman who'd been deserted by her husband. I didn't see any reason to believe that one story should be any truer than the other. Now, we don't feel that way at this stage in the play because we can see all the terrible things that have happened to Eva. But if we put ourselves in Sybil's shoes at the time that she first met Eva, then this actually seems quite a reasonable proposition. You know, why should she give financial help to a woman who has made repeated lies in order to gain money? That sounds like fraud. So when Eva finally tells her the truth, that she refused to marry Eric because they weren't in love, and that she refused to take money from him because it was stolen, these both sound like lies. You know, you sitting in Sybil's place would probably think that just doesn't sound right, and any reasonable person would have to question them. So that's the point that Priestley's making here. He's saying, look, if we had a welfare state, there would be the proper checks on people, and those that needed help would get it. It wouldn't be up to amateurs, like charities, to try and help people and judge their merits. Of course, the other problem with a charity is that it doesn't have an infinite amount of money. It's got a very small amount of money in real terms, and so therefore they have to say no to some people. Well, that's the opposite of the welfare state. The welfare state would simply work out whether you needed help or not, and then provide it at whatever that level is. So Priestley's actual purpose with Sybil Birling is to show that the welfare state needs to be created urgently, no matter how nice, kind and moral the people running the charities will be. He also points out that they're very likely to be prejudiced like Sybil Birling, and therefore very reluctant to give money to people they're prejudiced against. So, you know, he's still very critical of her, but he's going much further than that. He's saying in 1945, vote Labour because the Labour government are going to give us a welfare state. And we need a welfare state in order to look after everybody in our society because, if you remember, we are all part of one body. So let's try and put that in a really simple bit of writing for you to take away in your notes. This doesn't excuse Sybil Birling, but Priestley points out that it is not the job of the welfare state to make moral judgments. Yeah, it's the welfare state wouldn't judge whether you deserved to be poor, but obviously a charity would. And so lots of people would be denied help because the people running the charity will say, well, you just brought it on yourself. Well, the welfare state wouldn't do that. It would just see that you needed help and give you that help. So the welfare state helps people who are poor, even if their poverty is their own fault. So what does Priestley do next? Well, he condemns Sybil because she refuses to feel any guilt, even though her decision has led to the death of her own grandchild. And so that's a detail that's really important to put in there, because it's easy to miss out. And that's extraordinary, isn't it? Her actions have led to the death of her own grandchild, and she still feels no guilt. Possibly for me, this is the ultimate prejudice, because, you know, if this grandchild had been born to a woman of an upper class background, then she'd be far more likely to be upset at its death. So if you're making the most of this video for your revision, you will definitely have talked about the Greek myth and the Sybil's and the gift of prophecy. You will definitely have linked that to her wilful blindness, and you will have connected that to Sybil Birling being a victim of society, which has made her deliberately blind in order to accept the power that men have over her. And then finally, you will definitely make that link to 1945 and the election and the Labour Party's manifesto promise to create a welfare state that looks after everyone, regardless of why they have become poor. And then if you can link that to this idea that the examiners won't really have considered before, which is actually Sybil Birling actually behaves in quite a logical way, and Eva does tell her a complete pack of lies, and maybe she shouldn't have received money from a charity in that position, and that's why society needs a welfare state. Thank you for subscribing, good luck with your revision, and see you soon on my channel.